When a flight attendant named Brianna walked down the aisle of a packed Boeing 737 on the evening of March 14, 2024, she had no idea that the man sitting in the very last row was about to change her life forever. Not in the next few minutes, not that night, not even that month. But she was going to set something in motion that she could never take back. The plane was headed from San Francisco to Charlotte. 200 tired people, recycled air, plastic seats, a sun going down over the bay outside the terminal windows. Just another Thursday night flight, nothing special, nothing unusual. Except for one thing, seat 34C was not empty. Sitting in the middle seat of the very last row, knees pressed against the seat in front of him, one backpack tucked completely under the seat, wearing a simple gray hoodie and a pair of white sneakers his daughter had picked out that morning, was Stephen Curry, four-time NBA champion, two-time MVP, the greatest shooter in the history of basketball. He had booked the ticket himself, economy class, on purpose. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't testing anyone. He just believed, the way his father had taught him to believe, that no man is too important for the last row. And then Brianna walked up. She looked at his legs. She looked at his bag. And without a single word of kindness, without a moment of patience, she spoke to him the way you speak to someone you have already decided does not matter. She told him to move his legs. He moved them. She told him his bag was not under the seat. It was under the seat. He pushed it one more inch anyway. And then she looked at this quiet, humble, world-famous man sitting in the middle seat of the last row of her plane, and she said 7 words. 7 words that, in that moment, felt like nothing. 7 words that would end up costing more than anyone in that cabin could have imagined. Steph said nothing back. He put his headphones in. He watched the bay disappear beneath the clouds. He landed in Charlotte just before midnight, walked to his hotel room, and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. And he started thinking. That is the most dangerous thing about Steph Curry. Not the shooting, not the handles, not the 4 championship rings. It is what happens when he gets quiet and starts thinking. Because 6 weeks later, Brianna Colwell would walk into a building she had walked into 1,000 times, sit down across a table from a man she had never met, and be handed a folder that would make her hands shake. And somewhere in that folder was the answer to a question she didn't even know had been asked. Who owns this airline now? The answer to that question will change everything you think you know about this story. About Steph, about Brianna, about what it really means to teach someone a lesson. Watch this entire video. Because what happens next is not what you think. And the ending, the very last 7 words of this story, will hit you in a place you were not expecting. Stay right here. This is just getting started. The date was March 14, 2024. The place was San Francisco International Airport, Gate B22. It was a Thursday evening. The terminal smelled like burnt coffee and recycled air. Outside the tall windows, the San Francisco Bay was turning gold in the setting sun. Seagulls circled over the water. Inside, the gate was packed. 200 tired people shuffled in plastic chairs, scrolled their phones, and waited for a Boeing 737 to take them to Charlotte, North Carolina. Stephen Curry was one of them. He stood in line with everyone else. He was not in disguise. He wasn't trying to hide. He wore a simple gray hoodie, dark jeans, and a pair of white sneakers that his daughter Riley had pointed to that morning at breakfast, and said, "Those ones, Daddy." He carried one backpack, just one. No security team walking beside him. No assistant carrying his bags. No public relations person whispering in his ear. Just a man, a backpack, a boarding pass. His wife Aisha had tried to stop him before he left the house. "Baby, please," she said, leaning against the kitchen counter with her arms crossed, and that look on her face. The look that meant she already knew she wasn't going to win, but she was going to try anyway. "Just upgrade the ticket. It's one flight, 3 hours." "That's exactly why I don't need to upgrade," Steph said, smiling. He kissed her on the cheek. 3 hours is nothing. 3 hours in a middle seat is something. He laughed. He picked up his backpack and headed for the door. The truth was, he had a reason for booking economy. A real one. His father, Del Curry, had played 16 years in the NBA. 16 years of road trips and away games and red-eye flights. And Del had flown commercial the entire time. Coach seats. Middle seats. Connecting flights through cities that made no geographic sense. He used to say that the moment a man starts believing he deserves more space than the person next to him, something important starts to die inside him. Steph had never forgotten that. He boarded with Group 5, the last group called. The people who boarded last and got no overhead bin space and had to gate-check their carry-ons. He walked down the narrow aisle of the plane, past the wide leather seats of first class, past business class, past the rows where the seats had extra inches and the armrests didn't feel like weapons, all the way to the back. Row 34. He found his seat. Seat C, the middle. By the window sat a grandmother named Dolores Whitman. She was from Savannah, Georgia, and she had already settled in completely. Reading glasses on, crossword puzzle open on her tray table, a butterscotch candy unwrapping slowly between her fingers. She looked up when Steph arrived and gave him a warm nod, the kind that grandmothers give strangers when they've decided the stranger is probably fine. On the aisle sat a college student named Marcus Felton. He was home from NC State for spring break. His headphones were already on, his eyes were already closed, and he was already gone from the world. Steph squeezed into the middle seat, 6 feet 2 inches of 4-time NBA champion, wedged between a grandmother's crossword puzzle and a college kid's playlist, knees pressed gently against the seat back in front of him. He adjusted his backpack under the seat. He got out his own headphones. He pulled up a playlist Aisha had made him called Long Flights Only. He was going to be fine. That is when Brianna Colwell came down the aisle. She was in her late 30s, dark hair pulled back tight. A name badge clipped slightly crooked on her navy blue blazer. She had worked for Coastal Atlantic Airways for 11 years. She was efficient. She was sharp. She moved through the cabin with the kind of practiced speed that comes from doing something thousands of times. She stopped at row 34. Her eyes went to Steph's backpack first, then to his legs, which were angled 2 inches into the aisle because a 6'2" man simply has nowhere else to put them in a seat with 29 inches of legroom. "You need to move your legs," she said. Not a question, not a request. A statement dropped from a height. Steph looked up. He smiled. Easy and natural. The way he always smiled. The way people who grew up watching him play recognized immediately. "Sorry about that," he said. He shifted his knees to the right. She didn't move. Her eyes dropped to his backpack. "Your bag needs to be fully under the seat." "It is fully, sir." Her voice cut through his sentence like a door swinging shut. Hard, flat, final. "I have been doing this for 11 years. I know when a bag is properly stowed. Yours is not." Dolores Whitman's pencil stopped moving on her crossword. Marcus Felton opened one eye. Steph leaned forward slowly. He looked under the seat. The backpack was completely under the seat, every inch of it. He reached down anyway and pushed it forward 1 single inch, the only inch left to give. "There you go," he said. He sat back up. He was still calm. He was still smiling. Not a fake smile, a real one. The kind that costs something to keep on your face. Brianna Colwell looked at him for a long moment. It was not the look of someone who had just recognized a famous person and felt embarrassed. It was something else, something harder and more distant, like she was looking at a problem she had already categorized and moved on from. "Stay in your seat," she said. "Don't cause problems." She walked away. Dolores Whitman waited exactly 4 seconds. Then she leaned toward Steph, her voice soft as warm bread. "Honey," she said. "Does she know who you are?" Steph put his headphones in slowly. He looked out past Dolores, through the small oval window, at the last sliver of gold light disappearing over the bay. Probably not, he said quietly. He did not say the other thing, the thing that was already sitting in the back of his mind, quiet and still, the way the most dangerous thoughts always are. He pressed play on Ayesha's playlist. The plane began to move. The plane touched down at Charlotte Douglas International Airport at 11:47 p.m. The cabin lights came up slowly. People stretched and groaned and reached for bags they had been thinking about for the last hour. Dolores Whitman tucked her crossword puzzle into her purse, folded her reading glasses, and patted Steph once on the hand before standing up. "You have a good night, sweetheart," she said. "And you remember something." "What's that?" "How a person treats you when they think you don't matter," she said. "Tells you everything about who they really are." She shuffled up the aisle without another word. Marcus Felton pulled his headphones down around his neck, grabbed his duffel from the overhead bin, and gave Steph the kind of nod that young men give each other when words feel like too much. Then he was gone too. Steph was one of the last people off the plane. He walked through the terminal slowly. Charlotte Douglas was quieter at midnight. The shops were closed. The moving walkways hummed along, carrying nobody. His sneakers made soft sounds on the polished floor, and he walked without rushing, because he was thinking. And when Steph Curry was really thinking, the rest of the world slowed down around him. People who had played against him described the same thing on the court. Everything seemed to move in slow motion for him, while everyone else was rushing. He checked into the Kimpton Tryon Park Hotel in uptown Charlotte, just after midnight. The lobby was warm and dim. A jazz piano played from somewhere he couldn't see. The woman at the front desk recognized him immediately and opened her mouth to say something, and he gave her a small, kind smile and a slight shake of his head, and she understood. Not tonight. He took the elevator up alone. He sat on the edge of the hotel bed in his room and ordered a turkey sandwich and a bottle of water from room service. He set his backpack against the wall. He stared at it for a second. He picked up his phone. He did not open Twitter. He did not call his agent. He did not text any of the 15 group chats his name appeared in. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for: Raymond Osei. Raymond was his business advisor, his financial strategist, and one of the 12 people in the world Steph trusted completely. They had met in 2015, right after Golden State won its first championship, when Steph was beginning to understand that the money he was making needed to become something more than money. Raymond had grown up in Accra, Ghana, moved to the United States at 17, worked his way through the Wharton School of Business, and spent a decade at a private equity firm before going independent. He was meticulous. He was honest. He answered the phone at all hours without complaining about it. It was 1:04 a.m. when Steph called. Raymond picked up on the second ring. "You land okay?" Raymond asked. "Yeah," Steph said. "I need to talk through something." He told Raymond everything. The backpack, the legs, the 7 words. He described it plainly, without drama, the way he described plays after a game. What happened, in what order, and what it meant. Raymond listened without interrupting. This was his greatest skill. When Steph finished, Raymond said, "How do you feel?" "I feel fine," Steph said. "That's not the point." "What's the point?" Steph stood up and walked to the window. Uptown Charlotte spread out below him, quiet and glittering. Somewhere out there was the Spectrum Center, where his father had played for the Charlotte Hornets for 10 seasons, where Steph himself had sat in the stands as a little boy eating popcorn and watching Dell shoot jumpers in warm-ups, learning without knowing he was learning. "She talked to me like I wasn't a person," Steph said. "Not because she didn't recognize me. She looked right at me and decided I didn't matter. You understand the difference?" Raymond understood the difference. "What are you thinking?" "I don't know yet," Steph said. "That's why I'm calling you." A long pause opened up between them. "Pull everything you can find on Coastal Atlantic Airways," Steph said finally. "Ownership structure, financial health, SEC filings, recent earnings, everything. Raymond was quiet for 3 full seconds. "Steph, I know. Are you being serious right now?" "Raymond." Steph turned away from the window. "I am always serious at 1 a.m. He hung up. He ate his turkey sandwich. He lay back on the hotel bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to Charlotte sleeping outside and let his mind do what it did best. At 2:31 a.m., his phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Raymond. 4 words. "You could actually do this." Steph read it once. He set the phone face down on the nightstand. He closed his eyes. He did not smile. He did something quieter than smiling. He decided, nobody does big things loudly at first. Steph Curry had learned this before he learned almost anything else about basketball. His father taught him. Del Curry was not the biggest player on any court he ever stood on. He was not the fastest. He did not dunk. He did not trash talk. What he did was move without the ball in ways that defenders never tracked until the ball was already in his hands and the shot was already gone. Invisible until it wasn't. Steph built his entire game on that idea. And somewhere along the way, without planning it exactly, he had built his business life the same way. So he moved quietly. The first call he made in the morning was to Claudia Ferreira. Claudia was a Brazilian-American investment attorney, based on the 38th floor of a glass building on Lexington Avenue in New York City. She was 44 years old, sharp-boned and sharp-minded, and she had spent 15 years doing nothing but structuring deals in aviation and transportation. Steph had met her at a Goldman Sachs Leadership Summit in 2022. She had walked up to him at the end of a panel discussion, handed him a business card, and said 6 words without any warmth or flattery in them whatsoever. "When you're ready to do something real." He had kept the card in the back pocket of his wallet for 2 years. He found it the morning after the flight. He called her at 8 a.m. She picked up on the first ring, as if she had been expecting him for exactly 2 years. "Curry," she said. "Ferreira," he said. "What are we doing?" "I want to buy an airline." A pause, short and precise, like everything about her. "Which one?" "Coastal Atlantic Airways, subsidiary of Meridian Travel Group out of Charlotte. Pull their financials and call me back before noon." She called back at 11:42 a.m. The second person Steph brought in was James Okafor. James was 58 years old, a big, quiet man who wore the same style of wire-rimmed glasses he had worn since 1994 and never seemed to feel the need to change them. He had spent 22 years at Delta Airlines, rising from a junior operations analyst to a senior vice president of network planning, before leaving in 2019 to consult for private equity groups who wanted to understand what they were actually buying when they bought an airline. He knew route profitability, union contracts, maintenance schedules, gate lease agreements, and fuel hedging strategies the way Steph knew pick-and-roll coverage. Completely, instinctively. Raymond had worked with James twice before and trusted him without reservation. The 3 of them, Steph, Claudia, James, met for the first time together on the morning of April 3, 2024, in a conference room on the 41st floor of a building in San Francisco's financial district. The room had floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the bay. On a clear day, you could see across the water all the way to the East Bay Hills. Nobody looked at the view. Claudia had printed Meridian Travel Group's full financial picture and laid it across the conference table in neat stacks. Liabilities, assets, debt structure, route profitability by corridor, employee headcount by division, recent SEC filings, labor dispute history, fleet age and maintenance cost. James put on his glasses and picked up the first stack without being asked. He read for 4 minutes in complete silence. "It's a wounded bird," Claudia said, "not a dead one." James set the papers down. "The fundamentals aren't broken. The culture is broken. There's a difference, and it matters enormously when you're deciding whether something is worth saving." Steph leaned forward with his elbows on the table. This was how he sat when he was locked in. Anyone who had watched him study game film would have recognized it immediately. "Can it fly again?" he asked. James looked at him steadily over the rim of his glasses. "With the right leadership and a $200 million capital injection? Yes. Without question, yes." $200 million. Steph did not blink. He did not shift in his chair. He had spent 9 years building a financial portfolio that most people didn't know existed because he had built it carefully and without noise. His NBA contracts, his Curry brand partnership with Under Armour, early investments in tech companies like Niantic, the company behind Pokémon Go, which he had backed before most people had heard of augmented reality, a stake in a media production company, real estate, consumer brands. He had been building towards something without knowing exactly what it was. Now he knew. "What happens to the employees?" he asked. James paused. Claudia looked up from her papers. This was not the first question investors usually asked. The first question was usually about margins, or exit strategy, or debt restructuring timelines. In 15 years of aviation deals, Claudia had sat in many rooms, and she could not remember the first question ever being about employees. "That depends on who buys it," James said carefully, "and what they intend to do." "I'm telling you what I intend to do," Steph said. "So tell me what happens to them." James took his glasses off and cleaned them on his shirt, the way he did when he was choosing his words. "Then they keep their jobs. We go in, we restructure management from the top down. We fix the training. We fix the culture. And the 2,400 people who show up every day and do the actual work of running an airline keep doing that work. Better supported than before. Training," Steph said. He said it like the word meant something specific, like it was a pin he was pressing into a map. It did mean something specific, but that part would come later. Claudia looked between the two of them. She had a deal to structure, and she was already building it in her mind, the way architects see a finished building before the first brick is laid. "If we're doing this," she said, "we move in stages. Open market share acquisition first. Slow and quiet. Multiple holding companies, so nothing traces back until we're ready. When we cross the threshold that triggers mandatory disclosure, we will already be deep enough that the board has no real choice." "How long?" Steph asked. 3 months, to get to a controlling position. Maybe less if the stock keeps sliding. Steph looked out the window at the bay. The same bay he had looked out at from Gate B-22 3 weeks earlier, waiting to board a plane in Group 5. He thought about Row 34. He thought about Dolores Whitman's butterscotch candy, and Marcus Felton's headphones, and every single person sitting behind Row 20 on every flight this airline had ever flown. "Let's go," he said. They went. And while they did, Brianna Colwell went to work. She did not know. She had absolutely no reason to know. The name Stephen Curry had not entered her mind once since that Thursday evening in March when she had walked down the aisle of Flight CA-447 and found a tall man with a backpack that was 1 inch out of place in a world that kept falling apart around her. She flew her routes the way she always flew them. Charlotte to Atlanta, Atlanta to Nashville, Nashville to Dallas, Dallas back to Charlotte. The same corridors, the same safety demonstrations, the same recycled air and plastic cups and call buttons lighting up like tiny orange stars above her head. She moved through the cabin with her clipboard and her practiced efficiency, and she did her job the way she had done it for 11 years. From the outside, nothing had changed. But this is the place in a story where the outside stops being enough. Brianna Colwell was 38 years old. She had grown up in Kannapolis, North Carolina, the daughter of a textile mill worker and a school cafeteria cook. She had been the first person in her family to get a college degree, a fact her mother Eunice had celebrated by framing Brianna's diploma and hanging it above the television in the living room where it had stayed ever since. She had joined Coastal Atlantic Airways at 27, fresh and eager, the kind of flight attendant who remembered passengers' names and noticed when someone looked nervous and found small ways to make it better. That woman still existed inside Brianna Colwell. She had just been buried under 2 years of something very heavy. In the spring of 2022, Eunice Colwell had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer, stage 3. The words had landed on Brianna like a physical weight, something she could feel pressing on her chest every morning when she woke up. She had driven to the hospital in Gastonia, North Carolina, on every day off she had. She learned how to read oncology reports. She learned the names of medications she couldn't pronounce 6 months earlier. She sat in waiting rooms with bad lighting and lukewarm coffee, and fought with insurance company representatives on the phone during layovers. In cities she would leave in 3 hours. She was exhausted in the specific way that caregivers get exhausted. Not tired from doing too much. Tired from carrying something that never got lighter and never got put down. Her closest friend at the airline was a flight attendant named Priya Nair. Priya was 34, originally from Chennai, India, warm and perceptive in equal measure. She had noticed the change in Brianna, the way you notice weather changing, gradually, then all at once. The banana bread Brianna used to bring for the crew on long trips had stopped appearing. The way she used to linger in the galley, telling stories about her mother's cooking, had been replaced by a silence that had no bottom to it. One evening in February 2024, 5 weeks before the flight to Charlotte, Priya and Brianna sat together in a hotel room in Dallas after a long day. Brianna had been sharp with a young couple in row 12 over a reclined seat during boarding, the kind of sharpness that went past policy enforcement into something more personal. Priya waited until the room was quiet. "You're not yourself," she said. "I'm fine," Brianna said. She was looking at her phone. She was always looking at her phone now, waiting for calls from the hospital. "Brianna." Priya waited until Brianna looked up. "You're not fine. And you haven't been fine for a very long time, and everyone can see it except you." Brianna set her phone down on the bedspread. She looked at the wall for a moment. Outside, Dallas hummed and glittered 12 stories below them. "I just need one place where everything follows the rules," she said finally. Her voice was quieter than Priya expected, stripped of its usual hardness. "At home, at the hospital, with the insurance people, nothing goes the way it's supposed to. Nothing stays where I put it." She paused. "On the plane, I know exactly what's supposed to happen. I know where every bag should be, and when every tray table should be up, and how every passenger should sit. I can't control anything else right now, so I need that. I need one thing I can control." Priya sat with that for a long time. She didn't excuse it, but she understood it in the deep, quiet way that only real friends understand things. The man in row 34 had not been a person to Brianna in that moment. He had been a bag that was 1 inch out of place, a variable that refused to behave. In a life where everything was sliding, she had gripped the one thing within reach. She didn't learn his name until June 15, 2024. That was the morning Priya texted her a link at 7:43 a.m., while Brianna was sitting in her mother's hospital room in Gastonia, holding Eunice's hand and watching morning light come through the blinds one thin stripe at a time. The link was to an article in The Athletic. The headline read, "Stephen Curry is buying an airline," and it started with a seat in economy. Brianna read the first paragraph, then the second. Then she stopped and started again from the beginning, because she needed to make sure she was reading what she thought she was reading. She was. Eunice watched her daughter's face change the way only a mother can watch. The color shifting, the jaw tightening, the eyes going somewhere far away, and not entirely coming back. "What is it, baby?" Eunice asked. Brianna lowered the phone slowly to her lap. Outside in the hallway, a nurse's cart rolled past. A monitor beeped somewhere down the corridor. The morning light moved one stripe further across the hospital floor. "I think I made a mistake," Brianna said. Eunice looked at her daughter with the particular clear-eyed steadiness that illness sometimes grants people. When you have spent 2 years looking at things that are hard to look at, ordinary things stop being able to hide from you. "What kind of mistake?" she asked. Brianna looked at her mother. then down at her phone, then back at her mother. "The kind," she said slowly, "that I can't undo. But some things that cannot be undone can still be made right." That truth was still 3 months away from Brianna Colwell on that quiet morning in Gastonia. She didn't know it yet. She sat in her mother's hospital room and held the phone in her lap and stared at the wall and felt the specific sick feeling of a person who has just understood something about themselves that they cannot ununderstand. The world, meanwhile, kept moving. The acquisition was finalized on July 19, 2024. On that Friday morning in a law office on the 29th floor of a building in downtown Charlotte, papers were signed and hands were shaken, and Claudia Ferreira allowed herself exactly one small smile before returning to her normal expression of focused intensity. A James Okafor shook Steph's hand and held it a beat longer than a regular handshake. Raymond Osei sent a voice note from San Francisco that was 11 seconds of him laughing and then saying, "We actually did it," and then laughing again. Stephen Curry's investment group was now the controlling owner of Meridian Travel Group and its subsidiary, Coastal Atlantic Airways. The deal valued the company at $380 million. It was the largest single acquisition by an active professional athlete in American sports history. The press conference was scheduled for July 23, 2024. It was held at Charlotte Douglas International Airport. Not in a hotel ballroom. Not in a downtown conference center. At the actual airport, in the wide-open corridor of Concourse B, right beside the gates where real passengers moved through every single day with their rolling suitcases and their coffee cups and their tired faces. Steph had chosen the location himself. Raymond had suggested a hotel ballroom. Claudia had suggested the Charlotte Convention Center. James had said nothing because he already understood why neither of those places was right. The airport was the point. The airport was always the point. Reporters arrived from everywhere. Espen sent 2 people. Bloomberg had a camera crew. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Charlotte Observer, Sports Illustrated. Photographers lined the front. Microphones crowded the podium like a small silver forest. In the back of the room, standing in 2 loose groups near the concourse windows, were approximately 40 Coastal Atlantic Airways employees. Gate agents in their Navy uniforms. 2 aircraft mechanics still in their work clothes. A baggage operations supervisor named Gerald Tibbs, who had worked at Charlotte Douglas for 19 years and driven 40 minutes that morning specifically to be in this room. 3 flight attendants standing together, including Priya Nair, who had requested the morning off and had not told anyone exactly why. Brianna Colwell was not there. She was at the hospital with her mother. Steph walked to the podium in a blue blazer and a white open-collar shirt. No tie. No jewelry except his wedding ring. He looked like a man who had just come from somewhere real, rather than a man who had been prepared by a team. He began his prepared remarks. He talked about the strategic opportunity in regional aviation. He talked about the importance of domestic travel infrastructure. He talked about capital investment and route expansion, and the long-term vision for the carrier. The reporters typed. The cameras rolled. It was a good press conference. Then he stopped. He looked down at his notes for a moment. He folded them in half. He set them on the podium. He stepped to the side of the podium and walked toward the back of the room. The reporters turned in their seats. The cameras swiveled. The 40 employees near the windows straightened instinctively, the way people straighten when something unexpected moves in their direction. Steph stopped about 10 feet from the employees. He put his hands in his pockets. "Can I just talk to these folks for a second?" he said, not into a microphone, just out loud, in the room, the way you talk when you mean it. Nobody said no. The room went the specific kind of quiet that only happens when something real is about to be said, in a place where real things don't usually get said. "I want to be straight with you all," Steph said, looking at the employees, not at the cameras. "I didn't buy this airline because I was angry at one person on one flight. That's not what this is." He paused. "I bought it because I sat in row 34 of one of your planes, and I felt something that I couldn't shake. And what I felt was this: the people in the back of the plane deserve the exact same dignity as the people in the front. That's it. That's the whole idea." Gerald Tibbs, the baggage operations supervisor, crossed his arms slowly. Not defensively. The way a man crosses his arms when something lands exactly where it needed to land. "Nobody here is losing their job," Steph continued. "I want to say that plainly, so there's no confusion and no fear. What we're changing is not who works here. What we're changing is how we treat each other. Crew to passenger, company to employee, all the way through, every direction." A woman in a ground crew uniform in the second row had tears running quietly down her face. She made no move to wipe them. Priya Nair looked at the floor for a moment and then back up. "My father flew commercial for 16 years in the NBA," Steph said. "Every road trip, every away game. Coach seats, middle seats, layovers in cities that made no sense on a map. He used to tell me that the way you treat someone when you have power over them, when they're strapped into a seat and they cannot go anywhere, that tells you more about who you are than almost anything else." He looked out at the room, at the reporters and the cameras, and the 40 people in the back who had shown up on a Tuesday morning because something told them they needed to be here. "I want this to be an airline that my father would be proud to fly on," he said. "That's the whole standard. That's all it is." The room erupted. Not polite applause, real applause. The kind that starts before people decide to clap, that comes from somewhere below the decision-making part of a person. James Okafor stood off to the left wall, with his arms folded, and a small contained smile on his face. Claudia Ferreira was already looking at her phone, fielding the first of what would become 14 calls from other aviation and investment groups before the day was over. Raymond Osei sent a text from San Francisco that said simply, "Your dad just called me. He's crying." Steph read it standing at the podium while the applause was still filling the concourse. He kept his face exactly still. Championship athletes learn to keep their faces still at the moments that matter most. But something moved briefly behind his eyes, there and then gone, like light crossing water. The media named it by the end of the day, the Row 34 Standard. It would be on the front page of the Charlotte Observer the next morning. It would be the lead segment on ESPN's evening broadcast. It would trend in 14 countries by midnight. But the most important thing that happened that day did not happen at the podium. It happened in a hospital room in Gastonia, where Priya Nair sent Brianna Colwell a 20-second video clip of Steph walking toward the employees and saying the words about the back of the plane and dignity. Brianna watched it once, then she watched it again. Then she set the phone face down on her mother's hospital blanket and pressed both hands flat against it and closed her eyes and stayed very still for a long time. Eunice watched her daughter and said nothing. She had raised this woman. She knew what that stillness meant. It meant something was finally beginning to move. But moving and arriving are two different things. Between them is the hardest part. The part where you have to sit down at a kitchen table at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning before a shift you are dreading, and do the thing that frightens you most. Not because someone is making you, not because there are consequences waiting if you don't, but because you have looked at yourself clearly enough and long enough that turning away no longer feels like an option. Brianna Colwell sat down at her kitchen table on August 29, 2024. The kitchen was small. The table was round, wood, scratched at the edges from years of keys and coffee mugs. The window above the sink looked out at a narrow backyard where a single oak tree was beginning to turn at the very tips of its highest branches. The first suggestion of autumn. Everything still mostly green, but something changing underneath. She had a yellow legal pad. She had a pen. She had a cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago because she had been sitting there building up to this. The way you build up to stepping off something high. She wrote the first line. She crossed it out. She wrote it again differently. She crossed that out too. She flipped to a new page. 3 drafts went into the recycling bin beside the refrigerator over the next 40 minutes. Not because the words were wrong exactly, because they were the right words, arranged in the wrong order, which is its own kind of wrong. She kept starting with the explanation, the context, her mother, the exhaustion, the 2 years of wait. And every time she started there, it felt like she was building a case for herself before she had earned the right to make one. She flipped to a 4th clean page. This time, she started with the only thing that mattered. Mr. Curry, my name is Brianna Colwell. I was the flight attendant on your flight from San Francisco to Charlotte on March 14th. I am writing because I owe you an apology that I should have been capable of giving a long time ago and wasn't. She kept going. She wrote about the bag, about the legs, about the 7 words. She described each thing plainly without softening it or shifting blame toward anything else. She had treated him with a coldness he did not deserve. She had spoken to him as though his presence in that row was a problem rather than his right. She had made him feel small in a space where he had every reason to feel welcome. She wrote about her mother, carefully. 2 sentences only. I want you to understand something without using it as an excuse. For 2 years I have been watching my mother fight for her life, and I brought that fear onto the plane with me every single day, and put it down on people who had nothing to do with it. That is not a reason. It is only the truth of how I got here. She wrote the next part slowly, pressing the pen down harder than she needed to. The people in row 34, and every row behind it, deserved better than what I gave them. Not just you, all of them. Every person I moved through like they were furniture instead of human beings who had somewhere important to be. I see that now with a clarity that I wish had come sooner. She stopped. She looked out the window at the oak tree. She thought about the video Priya had sent her. Steph walking toward the employees at the back of the room. The words about dignity. The applause that sounded like relief. She looked back down at the page. I don't know if this letter reaches you. I don't know if it changes anything or if it matters at all in the direction of what you're building. But I needed you to know that I am not proud of who I was on that plane. And I have spent every day since June 15th trying to understand the distance between the person I became and the person I intended to be. I am trying to close that distance. She wrote one more line. Then she stopped. She read the whole letter from the beginning. Once. Slowly. She folded it in thirds and put it in a white envelope and wrote, Mr. Stephen Curry on the front, in her careful, slightly left-leaning handwriting. She held it in both hands for a moment. Then she put it in her work bag and went to get ready for her shift. She gave it to Priya that afternoon in the crew room at Charlotte Douglas, just before boarding. No explanation. Priya looked at the envelope and then at Brianna, and understood immediately that this was not the moment for questions. Priya gave it to the airline's new management liaison 3 days later. It reached Raymond Osei's desk on a Friday afternoon in San Francisco, paper clipped to a brief note from the liaison that said only, "Thought you should see this." Raymond read it standing up, leaning over his desk. He read it a second time sitting down. He called Steph at 4:15 p.m. "There's a letter here you need to see," Raymond said. "What kind of letter?" Raymond looked at the yellow legal pad pages through the clear envelope. He thought about how to describe a letter written at 6 a.m. by an exhausted woman at a scratched kitchen table trying to close the distance between who she was and who she meant to be. "The real kind," he said. Steph read it that evening sitting in his home in Atherton, California. Aisha sat beside him on the couch, close enough that their shoulders touched. She read it when he passed it to her without a word. The house was quiet. Their children were already in bed. Outside the window, the California evening was warm and still, and smelled faintly of the jasmine that grew along the back fence. Aisha finished reading. For a while, neither of them said anything. She spoke first. She told the truth, Aisha said. The whole truth. Not the version that makes her look better. The actual truth. "Yeah," Steph said. "That's rare." "Yeah," he said again. He sat with the letter in his hands and looked at it, and thought about all the ways a person can be two things at once: capable of cruelty and capable of honesty, worn down to something sharp and still trying to find the way back. He thought about his father. He thought about row 34. He asked Raymond the next morning to find out one thing: what was the current status of Brianna Colwell's employment? The answer came back within 2 hours. Coastal Atlantic Airways' previous management had placed her on administrative leave the week the story broke in June. The public attention had accelerated a process that might otherwise have moved slowly through internal channels. A termination recommendation was sitting in a pending file. In plain language, Brianna Colwell was 3 signatures away from losing everything. Steph sat with that information for a long time. He was her employer now. The power in this situation belonged entirely to him. He knew exactly what that meant. He knew what his father would say about a man who had power over someone who couldn't go anywhere. He picked up the phone. He called Thomas Way. Thomas was 41 years old, originally from Portland, Oregon, the son of a Taiwanese immigrant father who had worked 30 years as a hospital administrator, and a Black American mother who had spent her career as a public school principal in North Portland. He had grown up watching both of his parents run large organizations full of complicated human beings and somehow make those people feel seen and valued and capable of more than they thought they were. He had spent 15 years in human resources and organizational development before Steph's team recruited him specifically for the role they were creating. A role that had not existed in the old Coastal Atlantic org chart. A role the old org chart didn't have a category for. Head of People and Culture, not Head of Human Resources, not VP of Talent Management. Those titles were about compliance and liability and filling positions on an organizational chart. This role was about something different, something that Steph had insisted on in the first planning meeting after the acquisition closed. When James Okafor was walking through the new leadership structure and skipped past the gap where a people function should have been, Steph had stopped him. "Who takes care of the employees?" he asked. James looked at his org chart. "HR reports to the COO and handles." "That's not what I asked," Steph said. "I asked who takes care of them, who asks if they're okay, who notices when someone is carrying something too heavy and finds a way to help them put it down." James had looked at him for a moment. "That position doesn't exist yet," he said. "Then we build it first," Steph said, "before anything else." Thomas Way was that position. When Steph called him on that September morning and explained the situation, the letter, the pending termination, Brianna Colwell, Thomas listened the way good people professionals listen, without judgment and without rushing to a conclusion before all the information was in the room. "What are you thinking?" Thomas asked when Steph finished. "I'm thinking we have a choice here that says something about who we are," Steph said. "Firing her is easy. It's clean. It gives the story a tidy ending and everyone moves on. But easy and right are not the same thing, and I have never once confused them on a basketball court, and I don't intend to start now." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "What's the other option?" he asked, though he was already beginning to see the shape of it. What Steph proposed took 30 minutes to explain fully, and had clearly been forming in his mind for weeks, assembling itself quietly in the background, the way his best decisions always did. Brianna Colwell would be offered a choice. Option 1 was a full and fair severance package. Respectful, generous, with no non-disclosure agreement attached. Steph was specific about that. She would not be required to sign away her right to tell her own story as a condition of receiving what she was owed. Option 2 was enrollment in the first cohort of something new, the Row 34 Leadership Program. Thomas wrote everything down as Steph described it. A 6-month intensive initiative developed in partnership with a team from Duke University's Fuqua School of Business in Durham, 40 minutes up the road from Charlotte Douglas, and with a Charlotte-based mental health nonprofit called the Whole Person Project, founded in 2019 by a clinical psychologist, named Dr. Amara Solis, whose entire practice was built around the idea that professional behavior cannot be separated from personal well-being, that you cannot train kindness into a person who is drowning. The program combined genuine customer service leadership training with something most airlines had never offered their frontline employees: therapy access, real therapy, not an 800 number on a laminated card, caregiver support resources, financial planning assistance, a structured space to understand not just how to do the job better, but why the job had become hard in ways that had nothing to do with the job. It was built, Steph told Thomas, for the people who still had something to give, but had been given nothing to help them give it. "How many people do we enroll?" Thomas asked. "As many as needed," Steph said. "We start with whoever wants to be first." Thomas flew to Concord, North Carolina on a Tuesday morning 2 weeks later. He sat across from Brianna Colwell in a small conference room at a regional office near the airport. The room had a window that looked out at a parking lot, a ficus plant in the corner that needed watering, 2 paper cups of coffee that neither of them touched. Thomas explained both options completely and without pressure. He used plain language. He did not editorialize or suggest which choice was better. He laid both paths out clearly and told her the decision was entirely hers and that she would have 48 hours to think about it, and that either choice would be respected without question. When he finished, Brianna sat still for a long moment. "Why would he do this?" she said. Her voice was steady, but only just. "He doesn't owe me anything. He could fire me and everyone would say he was right." "He read your letter," Thomas said simply. Brianna looked at the table. "He said, and I'm using his exact words, that someone who can write that letter at 6 a.m. before a shift, when they're already running on empty and scared for someone they love, is someone this company needs." Thomas paused. Not despite what happened on that plane, because of what they did afterward. The ficus in the corner caught a thin band of light through the window blinds. Brianna did not cry in the meeting. 2 years of hospital waiting rooms had taught her how to hold things in until she reached the car. She held it in now with the steadiness of someone who had been practicing a long time. "Can I ask one thing?" she said. "Of course. The other people in the program." She looked up. "Are they all being given this because of something they did wrong?" Thomas considered the question carefully, because it deserved a careful answer. "They're being given it," he said, "because something went wrong around them for long enough that they stopped being able to be who they actually are. There's a difference." Brianna nodded slowly. She looked at the parking lot through the window. A ground crew vehicle rolled past, pulling a long train of empty baggage carts. She watched it until it disappeared around the corner of the terminal building. She looked back at Thomas. "Option 2, she said. Thomas nodded. He wrote nothing down. He simply nodded. "You're the first," he told her. She absorbed that for a moment. The weight of it. Being first at something is never only an honor. It is also a responsibility that arrives before the path is clear. "When do we start?" she asked. "Monday," Thomas said. She picked up her paper cup of cold coffee and took a sip and set it back down, and looked at the ficus in the corner that needed watering, and thought that the first thing she was going to do when she came back to this office on Monday was bring that plant a glass of water. It was a small thought, but small thoughts are how people begin. And from small beginnings, if the conditions are right and the people are willing, something real can grow. By the time October 4th, 2024 arrived, 35 people had joined Brianna Colwell in the Row 34 Leadership Program. Flight attendants, gate agents, a ramp supervisor from the Nashville hub who had been written up 3 times in 2 years and whom nobody had once asked if he was sleeping enough. 2 customer service managers who had been managing other people's stress while quietly drowning in their own. People who had started their careers full of something good and had spent years in an industry that consumed that goodness without ever thinking to replenish it. Dr. Amara Solis had told Thomas Way in their very first planning meeting that she expected resistance, that people would feel singled out, stigmatized, that they would see the program as punishment dressed in softer clothing. Instead, the waiting list had 42 names on it by week 3. People wanted to be asked if they were okay. They had simply never been asked before. The company-wide event on October 4th was held at Charlotte Douglas International Airport, Concourse B, starting at 10 a.m. All 2,400 employees had been invited. Over 1,900 attended in person. The rest joined by live stream from hubs in Atlanta, Nashville, Dallas, and 6 other cities across the coastal Atlantic network. Thomas Way had spent 3 weeks organizing it. James Okafor had handled the logistics of keeping the airline running while a significant portion of its workforce gathered in one place. Claudia Ferreira had flown in from New York. Raymond Osei had flown in from San Francisco. Del Curry had driven in from his home in Charlotte. He sat in the 3rd row with his wife Sonia, both of them in simple clothes, nothing announcing who they were. Del was 60 years old now, his hair silver at the temples, his face carrying the particular settled calm of a man who had lived through enough to know what mattered. He had not told Steph he was coming. He had called Raymond 3 days earlier and said simply, "I'd like to be there." And Raymond had said, "I'll save you a seat." And that had been the entire conversation. Steph saw his father when he walked onto the concourse and stopped for exactly 1 second before continuing to the stage. 1 second. Enough to see him and know he was there and carry that with him to the podium. He spoke for 12 minutes without notes. He talked about his father flying commercial for 16 years. He talked about row 34. He talked about what it felt like to be in the last row of a plane, pressed into a middle seat, and be treated as though your comfort and dignity were problems rather than obligations. He talked about what this airline was going to be, not just routes and revenue and on-time departure percentages. Those things mattered. They would pursue them with complete seriousness. But underneath all of it, beneath every metric and every quarterly report, there would be one standard that everything else was built on. Every person who boards this plane has a story you don't know. Treat them accordingly. The row 34 standard. When he finished, the concourse was loud in the way that only happens when people feel something collectively, when a room full of individuals briefly becomes a single thing. Del Curry sat in the 3rd row with his hands clasped and his head slightly bowed, and Sonia's hand on his arm. Steph stepped off the stage. He shook hands, embraced colleagues, spoke briefly with reporters who had been permitted into the back section of the concourse. Raymond moved beside him like a quiet current, managing the flow of people and conversations with the efficiency of someone who had been doing it for years. And then the crowd shifted slightly, and there was a clear path between Steph and a woman standing 10 feet away, in a navy blue uniform, name badge clipped slightly crooked on her lapel, hair pulled back the same way it always was. Some things don't change. Some things do. Brianna Colwell walked toward him. She had thought about this moment for weeks. She had prepared words for it, the way she had prepared words for the letter, carefully, in drafts, testing each sentence for honesty. But standing in the actual moment, in the noise and light of Concourse B with her colleagues all around her, all the prepared words dissolved the way prepared words always dissolve when the real thing arrives. She extended her hand. "Mr. Curry," she said. "I'm Brianna Colwell." Steph looked at her. He shook her hand firmly. "I know who you are," he said. She had expected those words to feel like something hard, a reminder, a weight. Instead, they landed differently than she had anticipated, the way things often do, when the moment finally comes after you have spent a long time imagining it. He knew who she was, not the version of her from Flight CA-447, the version who had sat at a kitchen table at 6 a.m. and told the truth. "I heard you were first through the program," he said. "Yes, sir. How was it?" She thought about the Duke professor who had asked her to write a letter to herself from the perspective of a first-time flyer who was terrified of turbulence. She thought about sitting in Dr. Solis's office on a rainy Wednesday afternoon in September, finally saying out loud the things she had been carrying silently for 2 years, feeling them become lighter the moment they had air around them. She thought about the afternoon in the hospital parking lot, when she had called Priya from her car and cried for 20 minutes, not from sadness exactly, but from the relief of something releasing. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done," she said. "Except taking care of my mom." "How is she?" he asked. Brianna blinked. He knew about her mother. He had read every word of that letter with the same attention he gave to game film. "She's fighting," Brianna said. "Her last scan came back better than the one before. Her doctor says she's responding." "Good," Steph said. And he meant it with the complete simplicity of someone who knows that a mother's health is not a small thing to mention in passing. She raised someone who can tell the truth when it's hard. That's not nothing. He held her gaze for a moment longer. Then he half turned to go. Then he stopped. He reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and produced a small white envelope, handwritten on the front in handwriting that was not his. "For B. Colwell. My wife wrote you something," he said. "She asked me to give it to you in person." He pressed it into her hand and walked toward his father. Priya appeared at Brianna's elbow from nowhere, the way Priya always appeared, as if she had a frequency tuned specifically to the moments Brianna needed someone beside her. "What is it?" Priya asked. Brianna opened the envelope with careful hands. Inside was a single white card, clean and simple. Aisha Curry's handwriting, neat and warm and unhurried. The handwriting of someone who had thought carefully about every word before committing it to paper. It said, "My husband tells me you wrote him a letter at 6 a.m. before a shift you were dreading, when your mother was sick and you were scared, and you were still trying to be honest. I want you to know that kind of courage is the foundation of everything we are building here. It is also, I think, the foundation of everything you are still becoming. Fly well." Brianna read it once. She read it again. Priya, reading over her shoulder, pressed her lips together and looked up at the ceiling, the way people do when they are trying to keep their eyes from spilling. Brianna folded the card carefully and held it against her chest for a moment, with both hands flat. Then she reached into her own jacket pocket. She had brought something too. She had been carrying it since she arrived that morning, pressed flat against her employee ID card, not knowing until this exact moment whether she would have the courage to give it to anyone. It was a photograph, printed on regular paper, slightly smaller than a standard photo, the edges precise because she had cut them carefully with scissors at her kitchen table the night before. It was a photograph of Seat 34C. She had gone back to that specific aircraft on a day off 6 weeks earlier. The same Boeing 737, tail number N824CA, which she had confirmed by cross-referencing the flight number with the maintenance logs. A thing she had needed Priya's help to do, because she had never looked at maintenance logs before, and she needed to be sure it was the right plane. She had boarded through the jetway on a Tuesday morning, when the aircraft was parked and empty, and being turned over between rotations. She had walked down the aisle, past all the rows she knew by memory. She had stopped at row 34. She had sat down in seat C, the middle seat. She had sat there for 30 minutes. She had not brought her phone. She had not brought anything. She had simply sat in 29 inches of space, with her knees pressed gently against the seat in front, and the armrests on both sides, and the low curved ceiling of the cabin above her, and she had stayed there until she understood something she could not have understood from the aisle. Then she had asked a maintenance technician to take a photograph. On the back of the photograph she had written one sentence. She gave it now to Raymond Osei, who was standing 3 feet away, managing the flow of people around Steph. She pressed it into his hand and asked him quietly to give it to Steph when the moment was right. Raymond looked at her. He nodded once. He gave it to Steph that evening, after the event had ended, and the concourse had emptied, and the two of them were standing by the tall windows, looking out at the runways, where the last evening flights were beginning to push back from the gates. Steph turned the photograph over. He read the 7 words written on the back. He stood very still for a long moment. The runways stretched out beyond the glass, lit white and blue in the early dark. And somewhere out there the planes were lining up the way they always did, one behind the other, patient and enormous, waiting for their turn to go. He called his father. Dell picked up on the second ring. "Dad," Steph said, "I need to read you something." Dell Curry, 60 years old, silver at the temples, 15 minutes from that airport by car, sat forward in his chair. "What is it, son?" Steph read him the 7 words written on the back of that photograph. 7 words. The same number she had said to him on the plane 7 months earlier. Dell was silent for a long time. The kind of silence that is not empty. "Son," Dell finally said, his voice low and careful, the way it got when something reached him all the way down. "Those 7 words," he said, "make everything worth it." What did Brianna write? "I finally sat where you were sitting." And that is the story of seat 34C. A tired woman, a humble man, a backpack that was already under the seat, and 7 words written on the back of a photograph that made a father go quiet on the phone. Nobody in that cabin on March 14, 2024, could have known what was being set in motion in that last row. Not Dolores with her crossword puzzle, not Marcus with his headphones, not even Steph himself, not fully, not yet. But here is the thing this story keeps coming back to. It was never really about the airline. It was about what happens when someone chooses to see the person in the last row. When someone chooses truth over silence. When someone chooses to ask not what a person deserves, but who they can still become. That is a choice available to every single one of us. Every single day. No championship rings required. Now, before you go, drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you are watching this from right now. We have people tuning in from everywhere, and we want to know where you are. It takes 5 seconds, and it always makes our day. If this story moved you even a little, hit that like button right now. Every like tells the algorithm that stories about kindness and second chances are worth sharing. And in a world that sometimes forgets that, every single click matters more than you think. And if you believe that how we treat strangers says everything about who we are, subscribe to this channel and join a community that is trying to spread that idea, one story at a time. Hit the subscribe button and ring that bell so you never miss what we put out next. Because we have more stories coming. Real ones, human ones, the kind that remind you what people are actually capable of when they choose to be better. And speaking of that, the next story is already waiting for you right there on your screen. Click it right now. You are going to want to see this one. We will see you in the next one.